Across the endless void of the Imperium, beneath a sky choked by the psychic storms of the warp, the light of the Astronomican flickers, just once. It is a tremor so faint that most dismiss it as interference, a whisper swallowed by the static roar of eternity. But for those who listen closely, the astropaths trembling in their sanctums, the tech priests calibrating their sacred instruments, it is as though the heartbeat of a god has stuttered. For 10,000 years, the Emperor of mankind has sat upon the golden throne, neither dead nor truly alive, entombed in fire and faith. His will sustains the Imperium. His silence defines it. But now the silence shifts. The corpse upon the throne stirs in rumor, in vision, in the haunted prayers of a billion souls who dare not speak aloud what they feel in their bones, that the master of mankind may be awakening. If the idea of that moment, the first breath of the Emperor after millennia of stillness, draws your imagination toward the edge of madness and wonder, stay with us. Subscribe, share this light with the faithful, and let the words of this chronicle carry you through the shadow of the Imperium. For what follows is not prophecy nor heresy. It is the dream of humanity itself. In the bowels of the void, where the warp churns like an ocean of living madness, the vigilant star drifted between dimensions. Its hull groaned as though remembering every soul that had perished aboard it, and the glow of its Geller field pulsed with the rhythm of fear itself. Within the navigator's sanctum, a cathedral of glass and shadow, Navigator Lysandra Vey pressed her third eye shut against the storm. Something was wrong. The Astronomican, that eternal beacon by which the Imperium navigated the darkness, had flickered, not dimmed, not faltered in the usual chaos of the immaterium, but flickered, like a candle guttering in a sudden wind. The warp screamed when it happened, not with the shriek of demons or the whisper of lost souls, but with a sound like a sob, too vast for any mortal to endure. Lysandra's breath came shallow. Sweat collected beneath her rebreather mask as she reached for her data slate, her trembling hands recording each psychic fluctuation in coded script. The Imperial Creed had taught her never to question the light, only to follow it. Yet now she wondered for the first time whether that light was alive and whether it had just moved. Beyond the sanctum's glass viewport, the stars elongated into distorted streaks of white and violet. Warp turbulence hammered the hull. The Vox relays were flooded with static prayers and broken hymns from the ship's lower decks. Somewhere below, a priest of the ecclesiarchy had already declared the event a sign, the Emperor's will made manifest through celestial tremor. Others whispered of doom. Lysandra only felt the weight of knowing. She turned to the relic shrine at the room's heart, where a bronze effigy of the Emperor sat in judgmental silence. "My lord," she whispered, her voice a thread in the tempest, "if you are stirring, what does that mean for us?" No answer came, only the slow, rhythmic pulse of the Astronomican returning to steadiness. But she felt something new, deep within the psychic lattice of her mind, a presence distant, immeasurable, but unmistakably aware. It was as though the Emperor's gaze, after 10,000 years of abstraction, had turned ever so slightly toward her. She collapsed to her knees. On Terra, the same moment replayed in 1,000 lives. In the quiet cloisters of the silent basilica, Sister Remembrancer Diana Vale opened her eyes and felt tears burning down her cheeks. She had not cried in decades, not since her initiation into the order that had stripped her of speech, her psychic gifts bound by the ancient oaths of the Sisters of Silence. Yet now, as the sacred wards flickered, her heart trembled beneath the weight of something beautiful and terrible. The Emperor's light filled her mind like the first dawn after endless night. She did not see him as man or god, but as a radiant force pulsing through the arteries of the Imperium. And beneath that radiance, faint and unmistakable, there was pain. Pain vast enough to drown 1,000 galaxies. Diana fell forward onto the marble floor, her breath catching as the scent of sacred oil and incense mingled with ozone. In her vision, the throne itself shivered, not as a machine breaking down, but as a heart beginning to beat again. The psychic resonance rippled through the pariah fields, setting off alarms across the palace's lower sancta. Custodians stirred in their armor, data spirits screamed, and tech priests prayed in binary canticles, somewhere far beneath the throne, in the labyrinthine depths where no sunlight had touched in millennia. Magos Ancient's ear Kelt Varian froze mid-incantation, his mechanical limbs stilled. servo motors whining softly. The readouts on his augmetic lenses flooded with impossible data streams, fluctuations that defied logic, equations rewriting themselves in real time. By the Omnissiah's divine circuits, he murmured, the flesh of his jaw trembling beneath a lattice of red cables. The core field matrix, it sings. Behind him, acolytes chanted the litany of continuance, oblivious to the meaning of the readings. The Golden Throne's power conduits were ancient beyond measure, maintained through ritual, not understanding. Yet Kelt felt the truth vibrating through every rivet and relic of the machinery. The throne was not failing. It was responding. He could hear it now through the thrumming of plasma channels and the static hum of the manifolds. A pattern within the noise, a rhythm, like a heartbeat reverberating through the very bones of Terra. He looked up toward the massive conduits that vanished into the dark above, the arteries that fed the throne, the conduits that carried the Emperor's fire across the planet. For centuries they had been silent. Now they pulsed. And in that pulse, Keltvarian swore he heard a word, not through vox or machine, but through the echo of his own consciousness. A single syllable burning through his mind like molten gold. Awake. He staggered backward, his metal limbs scraping against the floor, his logic cores overheating in disbelief. But the word remained. It was not meant for him alone. Across the galaxy, psychers and dreamers and saints awoke from restless sleep, gasping the same word without knowing why. The Astronomican flared, so bright that it seared the minds of 1,000 astropaths who gazed too closely. Warp entities screamed and recoiled. On far-flung worlds, Imperial citizens fell to their knees, sensing something divine had touched them. Some wept, others raged, others simply looked skyward in terror. And somewhere in that sea of human confusion and faith, the whisper began to spread. A rumor born from the edge of understanding, carried by trembling lips and encrypted vox songs. The Emperor had stirred. Yet not all who heard it felt joy. In the hidden archives of the Inquisition, deep within the Schola Obscuris, a shadowed figure studied the reports in silence. His armor bore no sigil, his face hidden behind a mask of black ceramite. Inquisitor Malkion read the psychic telemetry scrolling across the screen. A unified disturbance across the Imperium's warp grid, centered upon Terra. This cannot be allowed to spread, he said softly, his voice flat as iron. An aide hesitated. My lord, if it is true, if the Emperor is awakening... Malkion turned his masked gaze upon him. Then it is the greatest heresy of all. For if he rises, the entire architecture of control falls. The ecclesiarchy will fracture. The Mechanicus will war against itself, and the High Lords will drown in their own fear. Whether he wakes or not is irrelevant. The idea alone is enough to destroy us. He shut down the display, the sigils flickering out like dying stars. Burn the transmissions. Silence the witnesses. This must be contained. Outside the palace walls, the sky over Terra burned gold for a heartbeat, then fell back into its familiar smog-choked gray. But for those who had felt it, who had heard it, the world would never again be silent. The Emperor's breath, imagined or real, had touched them all, and in the silent, sacred vault beneath the Golden Throne, a ripple passed through the fluid-filled tubes that fed the corpse of a god. For a fraction of a moment, the eyelids of the Emperor, withered, ancient, and covered in golden filigree, quivered. The light of a dying sun passed across the cracked surface of his armor. Somewhere deep within that vast, imprisoned consciousness, a thought began to form. It was not language, not command, but memory of what once was, of what could be again. For 10,000 years, humanity had prayed for this moment. Now the question echoed through the immaterium itself. What happens when a god opens his eyes? The vigilant star emerged from the warp like a wounded animal, shuddering as its battered engines screamed in protest. Debris drifted from its flanks. Hulls of servitors, fragments of armor, fragments of faith. The warp storms had calmed, but the echo of what Lysandra had felt still lingered, vibrating within her skull like the residue of a song that could not be forgotten. In the command sanctum, the ship's captain knelt before the flickering hollow effigy of St. Drusus, his hands clasped, whispering half-remembered catechisms. Crewmen moved like sleepwalkers through the aisles, eyes haunted, lips moving in unison with unspoken prayers. The air was thick with ozone and terror. Lysandra entered, her robe stained with warp oil and incense soot. She moved past the crew as though walking through a dream, her third eye sealed beneath the sigil of protection etched upon her brow. Her voice, when it came, was low and trembling. "The light!" "It moved," she said. The captain lifted his head. "You speak blasphemy, navigator." "I speak truth," she replied, her words like shards of glass. "The Astronomican is not what it was. I felt its pulse. It lives, it thinks, it saw me." Silence swallowed the room. Even the hum of machinery seemed to pause. Somewhere in the darkness, a servo skull clicked nervously. The captain rose slowly, as though fearing his own shadow. "Then we are damned," he whispered. "No," said Lysandra, her eyes distant as if peering into something far beyond mortal sight. "We are summoned." The vox relays crackled, static giving way to a voice, ancient and fractured, whispering in dozens of overlapping tongues. The ship's choir of sanctioned psychers screamed in unison as their minds brushed the source. The voice was faint but undeniable. "Return to Terra." The words echoed through the bridge like a funeral bell. Across the galaxy, on a desert moon forgotten by any cartographer, a group of Imperial guardsmen huddled in the ruins of an abandoned shrine. Their regiment, the 121st Cadia Remnant, had been stranded for 6 years, their supply lines severed, their faith eroded by endless silence. They had prayed every dawn to a sky that never answered, until today. Private Jalen Marr was the first to hear it, a deep vibration beneath the earth, followed by a burst of golden light that erupted from the cracks in the shrine's altar. The men stumbled back, blinded, shielding their eyes from a brilliance that should not exist in such a dead place. "Emperor's bones," one muttered. Jalen fell to his knees. The air shimmered with heat and something else, something alive. He could feel it pressing against his mind, filling him with warmth and dread. The statue of the Emperor above the altar seemed to move, its metallic eyes glinting like molten gold. A voice rose within him, not from outside, but from the marrow of his soul. "Do not kneel in despair, child of man. Stand!" he gasped, clutching his head. Who speaks?" But no one answered. The others stared at him as though he were mad, but Jalen's eyes were wide, filled with tears. For the first time since the fall of Cadia, he felt something other than despair. Hope. On Terra, deep beneath the palace, the air tasted of sanctified ash and dying circuitry. The Adeptus Custodes stood motionless before the sealed gates of the throne chamber, their halberds burning with soft golden light. Each one had felt it, the faint shiver through the psychic veil, the pulse that seemed to radiate from the very marrow of the world. Captain General Trajan Valoris approached the dais, his golden armor reflecting the torchlight in radiant waves. Before him, a congregation of tech priests chanted in distorted binary, their mechanical voices harmonizing with the rhythmic hiss of sacred steam vents. "What is the state of the throne?" Valoris demanded, his voice echoing like thunder through the chamber. Magos Keltvarion stepped forward, still trembling. It breathes, Lord Commander. The conduits surge with power beyond any recorded capacity. Systems that have lain dormant since the age of apostasy now respond without input. The throne awakens itself. Valoris's eyes, old and piercing, narrowed. "And the Emperor?" The Magos's vox voice faltered. "We cannot say, but the psychic flux is measurable. He is not still." A silence heavier than stone settled over them. For 10,000 years the Custodes had guarded that chamber, their faith unbending, their discipline absolute. They had watched over a god who never stirred. Now the thought that he might awaken, no, that he was awakening, threatened to unmake the foundations of their existence. Valoris turned toward the massive adamantine gates. Beyond them lay the golden throne, and upon it, the Emperor himself. "You will not speak of this beyond these walls," he said at last. "Not to the High Lords, not to the Ecclesiarchy, not even to your own. The Imperium must not yet know." The Magos bowed, though fear trembled through his circuits. "As you command, Lord Commander." But the machine knows. It hums his name. We cannot silence that. Valoris's gaze lingered upon the sealed gates. For the first time in centuries he allowed himself to whisper a prayer, not of duty but of uncertainty. "If you rise, my Emperor," he murmured, "will you still call us yours?" In the void above Mars, the Mechanicus fleets burned their engines in chaotic motion. Vox channels alight with sacred argument. One faction sang praises to the awakening Omnissiah, declaring the pulse from Terra proof of divine presence. Others screamed warnings that this was no resurrection but the unmaking of all machine logic. Binary hymns collided with static curses. Orbiting manufactorums erupted in schismatic violence as red-robed priests of the cog battled one another beneath banners of fire. And through it all, the pulse continued. Every 12 hours, a tremor of light rippled through the Astronomican's core, matching the rhythm of a heartbeat. The warp grew strangely quiet, as though waiting. In the heart of that silence, far beyond mortal comprehension, something vast began to stir. A memory, perhaps, or a will. The emperor of mankind, immortal, immobile, unyielding, felt the faintest thread of awareness rethread itself through his ancient mind. The fragments of his consciousness, scattered across eons and dimensions, began to align like shards of glass finding their original shape. And through the veil of time and divinity, he remembered Terra, he remembered humanity, he remembered what it meant to breathe. The golden throne shuddered. Sparks of light cascaded from the conduits. For an instant, all across the Imperium, 1 billion souls shared a single heartbeat. And then silence. But it was not the silence of death. It was the silence of something becoming. The astropaths who survived that moment would never speak again. The ones who didn't were found smiling, their eyes glowing faintly with gold. Across the segmentum, ancient statues of the emperor cracked open at the chest, light seeping through the fractures like dawn through storm clouds. In the archives of Holy Terra, scribes began to write words they did not understand, their hands moving of their own accord. Inquisitor Malchion received the reports and burned them all. But even as the parchment turned to ash, he could not rid himself of the sound that haunted his dreams, an echo like a pulse, fast and slow and inevitable. The Emperor's light had moved once, and it would move again. In the deepest chambers beneath the Imperial Palace, where even the light of Terra could not reach, silence had a sound. It was the breath of ancient machinery, the whisper of burning incense over circuitry, the heartbeat of a god bound in gold. The throne room, the most sacred and forbidden place in all the Imperium, was a world unto itself, a vault of prayer and power where eternity hummed like a living wound. There, beneath the coiling mass of conduits and cables, the Emperor of mankind lay entombed. His form, colossal and fragile, was more relic than flesh. Bone turned to crystal, veins of fire running through his ruined body. Countless tubes fed into him, carrying the psychic lifeblood of 1,000 sacrificed psychers every day. For 10,000 years he had been both dead and divine, a paradox that had held the galaxy together through sheer will. Now, that will was stirring. Magos Kelt Varian stood before the throne, trembling. His augmetic eyes flickered with the light of impossible readings. The machine spirits that dwelled within the throne's mechanisms, the same entities that had lain dormant for millennia, had begun to sing, not in the mechanical monotone of data, but in harmony. Each pulse, each surge of energy carried rhythm, purpose, awareness. The Omnissiah breathes, whispered one of the lesser tech adepts. Silence, Varian hissed, though his own voice quavered. Do not name what you cannot understand. He watched the shifting aura of psychic light that shimmered faintly around the Emperor's body. It rose and fell in time with something almost human. He could not help but wonder, was this resurrection or something beyond it? Custodian Guard Erend Kalos stepped forward, his halberd glimmering like a shard of sunlight. Magos, he said, voice deep as an oath. You will cease your speculation. Record only what you observe. Varian bowed, his mechadendrites coiling. As you command, Lord Custodian. But understand this, if what I observe continues, the machine cannot be contained. It is remembering itself. Kalos's expression did not change, though his gauntlet tightened on his weapon's haft. He turned toward the golden figure on the throne and felt something within him twist, a strange alien sensation he had not known in centuries. It was not fear. It was awe. Then it happened again. A single slow pulse of light ran through the Emperor's armor. The conduits vibrated like the strings of a colossal instrument, and for one terrible, glorious instant, the entire chamber was filled with golden radiance. The custodians fell to one knee as instinct overtook duty. The tech priests screamed in machine prayer, their voices rising to mechanical hysteria. And from the Emperor's cracked lips came a sound, faint, raw, and ancient. A breath. Just one. But it was enough to send shockwaves through reality itself. Half a galaxy away, aboard the ship Vigilant Star, Lysandra Vey screamed as the sound ripped through her mind. The psychic network flared like a sunburst, and she saw him, not as man or god, but as a being of infinite sorrow wrapped in light. His eyes, closed for 10,000 years, seemed to open within her. In that moment, every thought, every memory, every human prayer ever whispered into the void pressed upon her soul. The Emperor's presence was everywhere, beneath the skin of stars, inside the bones of dying worlds, and then, a voice, not words but meaning, pure, incandescent meaning. They still live. Lysandra fell back against the glass, blood streaming from her nose. She felt his awareness spreading outward like fire through dry grass, touching every human mind that dared to feel hope. On hive worlds, serfs dropped their tools and wept. In the Scala Progenium, children woke screaming with visions of golden wings. Even in the cold void of the black ships, the bound psychers, those doomed to feed the throne, sang as one, their voices raw with joy and agony. Something vast was unfolding, something that could not be stopped. In the great hall of the High Lords, alarms blared as the golden banners of the Imperium trembled from unseen pressure. The air was heavy with static energy. Vox systems screamed and died. The assembled lords looked to one another with pale, uncertain faces. "Is it true?" demanded Lord Gaius Varn, master of the Astra Militarum. "Is he—" "Silence," spat the ecclesiarch, rising to his feet. His robes blazed with the firelight of burning incense. "You will not utter such claims in this hall. Heresy spreads faster than truth, and I will not see the throne undone by rumor." But even as he spoke, the stained glass behind him, a depiction of the Emperor's ascension, shuddered and cracked from the heat of unseen power. A ray of golden light pierced the chamber, slicing through shadow. The lords fell silent. The ecclesiarch stared at the crack as a single bead of molten glass slid down the figure's face like a tear. Inquisitor Malchion watched the scene through his private augur feed, his expression unreadable behind his mask. He had seen this before, in the prophecies of forbidden texts, in the psychic screams of dying oracles. "The return of the Emperor," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "The one miracle we were never meant to survive." He turned to his aide. "Activate the Ordo Chronos. Lock down Terra. Burn every message that mentions awakening or light. We will control this narrative, or it will destroy us." The aide hesitated. "And if we cannot control it, my lord?" Malchion looked back at the hollow image, the crack in the glass, the rising light, the trembling faces of the High Lords. "Then we pray that he does not remember us. Beneath all of it, beneath the fear, the faith, the chaos, a faint vibration pulsed through the bones of Terra. The people could not name it, but they could feel it, like the world itself was breathing again. Children born in that moment would later say they came into life beneath the sound of a heartbeat. Soldiers in the trenches swore they saw the stars blink gold, and in the echo of that breath, the human soul rekindled something it had forgotten long ago. Belief, untainted by doctrine or fear, the Emperor's light, once constant and distant, now moved. It was not mercy. It was not wrath. It was awareness. And as that awareness spread, every daemon in the warp screamed, because for the first time in 10,000 years, their god was looking back. The first tremor passed through the bedrock of Terra like a memory, ancient and sorrowful. The surface quaked not with violence but with purpose. Deep within the heart of the imperial palace, among its endless vaults of gold and bone, alarms wailed, a symphony of machine spirits crying out in disbelief. For millennia, the throne had been still. Now it moved. The hall of the custodes erupted into motion. Their golden forms glided across the marble corridors like living statues, their halberds raised in silent readiness. Vox channels flared with encoded orders, though none yet spoke aloud what every warrior of the 10,000 knew to be true. Something had awakened. Captain General Trajan Valoris stood at the apex of the Hall of Vigil, his gaze locked upon the hololithic display blooming before him. Energy signatures cascaded across the diagram of the throne's core like a storm front. Wild, beautiful, and utterly impossible. "The readings are increasing," reported Magos Keltvarian, his vox-distorted voice trembling with awe. "We are approaching a magnitude of psychic discharge unseen since the dark age of technology. The containment field cannot sustain this indefinitely." Valoris did not answer. His eyes, ancient, unyielding, remained fixed upon the golden pulse echoing through the schematic. Every beat resonated with the rhythm of a heart, the Emperor's heart. He turned slowly to the gathered custodes. Seal every passage to the lower sancta. No one enters the throne chamber without my order. The custodians bowed their heads in solemn unity. Magos, Valoris continued, can you identify the source of this awakening? Varian hesitated, his servo arms twitching. Source, Lord Commander? There is no source. The throne is no longer drawing upon its power reserves, it is generating energy. The machine spirits have entered a self-replicating state. They sing with purpose. Valoris's hand tightened around the haft of his weapon. And their purpose? Varian's mechanical voice faltered. To serve. To revive. The words hung in the air like heresy. Valoris turned back to the display, the golden lines reflecting in his eyes. The custodies were trained to feel nothing, to obey without question. Yet he could not deny the stir within his chest. Something perilously close to faith. Outside the throne chamber, the corridors of the Imperial Palace quivered beneath the weight of something vast and unseen. The Sisters of Silence moved through the hallways like ghosts, their psychic null fields clashing with the storm gathering within the walls. For the first time in their history, they felt powerless. The air itself shimmered with the presence of the Emperor's mind, a tide of consciousness so immense that even their null auras could not fully suppress it. Sister Remembrancer Diana Vale knelt before the sealed adamantine gates, her breath ragged, her bare palms pressed against the cold metal. Her silence was her prayer. She could feel him, closer now, pressing against the edges of reality like a rising dawn. Her thoughts, though bound by her vow of stillness, trembled with devotion and fear. What happens if you wake? Will we burn in your light or be remade by it? The answer came not in words but in feeling, a warmth that flooded her soul and left her weeping. It was not the fury of a god. It was sorrow, deep, endless sorrow. And then she heard the throne move. Not a sound of metal or power conduits, but of something alive, breathing beneath the weight of the galaxy. The adamantine doors shivered, dust falling from the frescoes of saints above them. Far across Terra, in the hall of the Astronomican, the choir of 10,000 psychers screamed as one. Their bodies convulsed, their eyes rolling back. Their minds stretched across the Imperium like candles in a hurricane. The light of the Astronomican flared beyond its usual brilliance, burning brighter than any recorded in history. At its core, the master of the choir, a pale figure known only as the Seer Primus, rose from his throne, his blind eyes bleeding gold. He stirs, he whispered, voice cracking with both agony and awe. He knows us again. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica scribes rushed to stabilize the network, but it was futile. The Emperor's psychic beacon had ceased to be a tool of navigation. It had become a voice. Every astropath across the galaxy felt it, some collapsing in ecstasy, others going mad with reverence. A transmission burst from Terra, traveling faster than light itself, carried not by vox, but by will. Its message was simple, ancient, and absolute. I am watching. The words appeared in the minds of billions. Across the stars, soldiers froze mid-battle. Priests fell to their knees, and planetary governors screamed as golden light spilled from their eyes. Faith had never felt so real, or so terrifying. In the Senate of the High Lords, chaos reigned. Fox spirits screamed, picked feeds distorted into fractal sigils. The ancient chamber shook as power fluctuations rippled through its sacred walls. Lord Varn slammed his gauntlet upon the marble table. "Explain this," he shouted. "What sorcery breaches the Astronomican?" "The throne itself trembles," rasped the fabricator general of Mars, his mechadendrites twitching with nervous fury. "We have confirmed independent resonance from the Noctis relay network. Whatever is occurring on Terra, it is rewriting the laws of machine logic. Even the machine spirits worship now. Blasphemy," the ecclesiarch thundered. "The Emperor needs no worship from metal mockeries." Yet even as he spoke, the servitors lining the hall began to chant. Their mechanical mouths moved in perfect unison, emitting a low, droning hymn. No one had programmed them to do it. The fabricator general's lenses flickered with alarm. "Do you see now, my lords? The song of the Omnissiah spreads through all circuitry. We are but extensions of his awakening." The ecclesiarch turned pale. "No, this cannot be. He is beyond such mortal concepts. He does not change, he is. But the chant continued, growing louder. Even the walls seemed to hum with resonance, as though the stone itself had begun to pray. And in the middle of it all, the High Lords realized the truth they had feared for 10 millennia. The Emperor no longer needed their words to be heard. Down in the labyrinth beneath the palace, Magos Varian stared at the golden light rippling through the conduits. His hand shook as he recorded data he knew would be heretical to even possess. The Emperor's presence was expanding through the throne's circuitry, repurposing it, reawakening systems no human had seen since the Unification Wars. Hologlyphs flashed before him, ancient machine languages lost to time. They spoke of functions long dormant: bio-interface reactivation, cortical restoration, neural communion. Varian's mechanical heart stuttered. He's not just awakening, he whispered. He's repairing himself. The machine spirits around him howled in exultation. Power surged through the chamber until the floor plates glowed molten gold. And then from the throne itself came a sound that none alive had ever heard. A voice. Not loud. Not even complete, but unmistakable. Who calls my name? The world seemed to stop. Lysandra Vey felt it even across the void. In her ship's sanctum, the navigator clutched her skull as the words burned through her mind like liquid fire. She saw flashes. Terra, the palace, the golden figure on the throne. His eyes opened not in anger but in recognition, and then silence. When she opened her eyes, she found herself weeping, not from pain, but from something deeper: understanding. The Emperor had not spoken to command nor to punish. He had spoken because he remembered. He remembered his children. The Imperium, for all its endless decay, was still his dream. But dreams could turn to nightmares when the dreamer awoke. The reply to that unheard question rose from everywhere at once. It came as a shiver through the choir's chained throats, as a tremor in the marble veins of the palace, as a whisper in the breath of a billion prayers. It came as static on the vox and hymn in the data stream, as incense smoke curling into glyphs that none had taught the flame to write. It came from Terra itself, from the world that had borne him, and from every world where humanity still clung to life with bleeding hands. Magos Kelt Varian steadied himself as the throne's radiance ebbed to a tolerable bruise. The hololithic arrays around him pulsed with recovered subroutines. Protocols for cortical pacification, echo-redundant life support heuristics, dormant since names had borders and thunder carried men across continents. He recognized too little and understood even less, yet the pattern was undeniable. The throne was no longer merely a conduit. It was interlocutor, instrument, and interlocutor again, learning the song it had kept in silence for 10 millennia. Stabilization coils 91 through 95 recalibrated without invocation. An acolyte blurted, awe-shattering into fear. "We did not petition the spirit, Magos." "You did," Varian said, voice narrowing to a ritual calm. "Only this time it heard you." Custodian Erend Kalos advanced 2 paces, his auramite plating drinking the gold like dawn across a blade. He studied the Emperor's ravaged form without blinking, as if the act of seeing were itself an oath renewed. "Report the risk." Varian's lenses ticked through spectrums. Overpressure in the new spheric baffles. But the manifold now vents along channels that did not exist yesterday. If the curve holds, containment is self-governing. He paused, the truth too large for careful liturgy. It is as if the machine anticipates harm to him and refuses it. "And to us?" Kalos asked. Varian's answer failed at his first attempt. "If he breathes again, Lord Custodian, we will be very small." Above them, unseen by most, the palace frescoes long blackened by incense and time began to show their buried colors. Angels that had flaked to shadow burned with sunlit. Enamel, laurels greened, the imperial aquila gleaned a truer shine. Dust fell in shimmering veils, and acolytes stepped back, hearts thudding with the simple, blasphemous realization that stone remembered what it had once sworn to be. Sister Remembrancer Diana Vale felt the change as taste on her tongue, a metallic sweetness. Like blood at the moment, pain softens into relief. Her null aura flattened the worst of the psychic weather. Yet even the quietest place becomes a bell when a continent moves. She set her palm to the adamantine gate and closed her eyes. He did not speak to her, he never had, but sorrow thinned and with it a weight she had carried since her vows. Not absolution, not even forgiveness. Only attention, vast and impartial, pausing upon her as sunlight pauses on stone. In the Senate chamber, the High Lords argued until the air itself seemed to recoil. Decrees were drafted, then burned. Contingencies were named, then renamed. The ecclesiarch demanded a world-spanning procession. The fabricator general demanded silence and data. The master of the Astra Militarum demanded transit rights for a ring of fortresses around the palace, older than any war now being planned in whispers. Inquisitor Malchion did not demand. He observed. His private auspex showed pilgrim rivers already swelling at every shrine between the Helios gates and the Lion's Court. He saw banners unfurling, faces upturned, the quick contagion of rumor taking on the gravity of right. He keyed a quiet channel and spoke in a tone that turned obedience into reflex. Seal the processional way, no bolter fire. No overt displays. Let them come as far as the first arch and no farther. Penance lines, kneelers, oil lamps. Give them something harmless to do. Doctrine, my lord, a voice replied. Doctrine is a dam, Malchion said. We are building spillways. Mars answered Terra with fire and fractal hymn. In the shadow of the red planet's manufactorum spires, Skitari cohorts stood at parade rest while their masters warred in liturgy. One forge sang the Omnissiahs arising with bell code that shook iron to echo. Another broadcast a counter-catechism of Constance, asserting that God engines do not wake because gods do not sleep. When the pulse from Terra rolled across the void again, 12 hours to the heartbeat, their binary quarrel faltered, and a sudden, perfect unison rose from a million vox grills, an intake of breath that none had programmed. On the desert moon where the 121st Cadia remnant had learned to starve without complaint, Private Jalen Marr stood before the cracked altar and kept his hands at his sides as if they were trying to rise of their own accord. The gold in the fissures had cooled to dull veins, but he felt it, patient beneath the stone like an ember that would not spend itself. His sergeant approached, boots whispering grit, expression set to spare them both the embarrassment of faith. You heard something yesterday, the sergeant said. Jalen nodded once. Say it plain. He told me to stand. Think he'll tell you why? Jalen looked at the sky, which had never been kind enough to warrant gratitude. He already did. Aboard the Vigilant Star, Lysandra Vey sat alone in the sanctum until the glass above her stopped quivering. The choir had been reduced by half, and those left alive did not sing so much as breathe in rhythm with a light they could not see. Lysandra found her hand upon the sigil that sealed her third eye and realized with a shock that felt like cold water that she was afraid to open it. Not of the warp, for she had lived in its teeth, but of seeing him again, of being seen so entirely that she would be remade into the answer to a question she had never known she was asking. She opened the sigil. The Astronomican was not a beacon now. It was a horizon, a line between night and day rolling outward, slow and unstoppable across a sea that could drown anything but would not drown this. She felt pathways clearing where storms had nested like carrion for centuries. She saw routes through madness becoming lanes again, and faint as a distant bell she perceived a vector not charted on any data slate. Homeward. Her breath left her in a soft sound almost like laughter. Return to Terra, she whispered, and this time the words were not command or fear. They were acknowledgement. In the throne room, the Emperor's chest did not rise, and yet the whole palace seemed to exhale. Dust settled. Lights dimmed to a steadier glow. The manifold storm drew itself inward like tide withdrawing from slaughtered shore. For a moment there was peace in a place that had forgotten the shape of it. Varian dared a step closer, each tread an offense that duty masked as necessity. He looked upon the face that had governed a species by dying for it and found in the ruin not triumph but labor. The labor of holding a thing beyond measure in place long enough for others to cross it. He knew then, with the humility that sometimes passes for wisdom, that whether this was awakening or dream was not for him to say. His task was smaller and therefore possible. Record, he said, and the acolytes obeyed, and the throne listened without caring. Kelos glanced to the sealed gates, sensing motion beyond the expected. It was not threat. He would have tasted that in the metal. It was approach, a small procession disciplined without banners. The High Lords? Varian asked, reading the angle of his helm. No, Kelos said, someone who remembers the old ways. Boots measured out of shadow. Oil lamps wove smoke into quiet braids. The adamantine shivered with a knuckles touch. A voice, level and without ornament, spoke from beyond the door. Captain General Magos, open for the Regent. The title hung like a key above a lock that had not turned in an age. The locks disengaged one by one, each bolt retracting with a groan that echoed like thunder through the sacred vaults. The doors of the throne chamber had not opened in living memory, yet now they parted with ponderous grace, releasing a wave of warm air and sanctified dust. From the darkness beyond stepped the Regent of Terra, clad in burnished gold and crimson. His armor bore the weight of centuries, each plate etched with the sigils of the Imperium's endurance. The laurels of office crowned his helm, and in his gauntleted hand he carried no weapon, only a staff capped with the twin-headed aquila. Lord Commander Robute Guilliman entered the chamber. The custodes knelt as one, the resonance of their armor striking the floor like the tolling of a cathedral bell. Only Valoris remained standing, his expression solemn but unyielding. "My lord," he said, his voice measured, "you honor this hall." Guilliman's gaze moved past him to the throne itself. "I did not come for honor," he said quietly. "I came because I felt him." Varian bowed low, his mechadendrites drawing sigils of devotion in the air. "The readings confirm it, Lord Regent. The throne awakens. The systems adapt to new instructions beyond our comprehension. The Emperor's own will may be riding through the machine." Guilliman approached slowly, each step reverent yet wary. His helm retracted with a hiss, revealing the pale, scarred face of the Primarch, still composed, but with eyes that shimmered faintly in the throne's golden light. He stopped before the vast figure of his father. The Emperor sat motionless, a god of ruin and radiance, his once living flesh now carved into the pattern of eternity. Yet beneath that mask of stillness, Guilliman felt it, the faint rhythm, the subtle tremor, the whisper that had haunted his dreams for nights uncounted. "You're still fighting," he murmured. "Even now." He lowered his head. "Father, I do not know if this is your awakening or the echo of our faith, but the Imperium cannot bear another false dawn. Tell me, what do you wish of us?" No sound answered him, only the slow pulse of the conduits and the golden haze thickening around the throne. Then, without warning, the chamber grew cold, the light dimmed, as though drawn inward, compressed into a single radiant point within the Emperor's chest. The air itself seemed to bow under its gravity. Guilliman took a step back, hand rising instinctively toward his sword, but stopped. A voice filled the chamber, not the thunder of divinity, not the metallic echo of the machine. It was soft, almost human, a whisper carried on the air like breath across parchment. "You built upon my silence." Every custodian froze. Varian dropped to his knees, sobbing in vox static. Guilliman stood unmoving, his expression unreadable. The voice continued, not from the throne but through it, resonating in the minds of all who heard. "You endured the long night. You bled for what you did not understand. You called my absence devotion." The air vibrated and the golden light flared again, gentle, pulsing, alive. "Now you ask what I wish." The throne chamber trembled. Cracks spidered through the marble floor, the weight of meaning itself pressing outward. "I wish to remember." Guilliman's lips parted, his composure fracturing for the first time since his return to life. "Remember what?" The light deepened, flooding the room in blinding brilliance. "What it is to be human." Every machine spirit screamed, every ward flared to life. The custodians raised their weapons, though against what none could say. The Emperor's eyes, sealed for 10,000 years, flashed with gold. For an instant, the entire galaxy saw. Every man, woman, and child across the Imperium, every psyker, every preacher, every soul who had ever whispered his name, felt the same pulse through their minds. They saw the Emperor not as a god upon his throne, but as a man walking through fire, his armor broken, his heart burning with grief. They felt his exhaustion, his love, his anger. And then just as suddenly it was gone. The light dimmed. The throne fell silent. Guilliman stood alone before his father, trembling, the echo of that single phrase carved into his soul. What it is to be human. He turned toward Valoris and Varian. "Seal this chamber," he said softly. "No word of this leaves these walls." Valoris nodded. Varian remained kneeling, his mechanical limbs quivering, whispering prayers in Binharic between sobs. As Guilliman turned to leave, he looked once more upon the throne. "If this is awakening," he murmured, "then humanity must prepare itself to face its own creator." The throne pulsed once, faintly, like the echo of a heartbeat heard through stone. The galaxy shuddered, not in noise or flame, but in thought. For a heartbeat that lasted eternity, every human mind became a mirror, and within it burned the same impossible reflection. The Emperor, not as God, but as man. The memory lingered like sunlight behind the eyelids, half dream, half revelation. And when the vision passed, it left the Imperium changed forever. On Terra, silence followed like the breath after thunder. The custodes stood unmoving at their posts. The Sisters of Silence knelt as if felled by invisible hands. Magos Varian wept until the tears scorched the metal of his face. Only Robut Guilliman remained upright, staring into the throne's fading glow, his expression a fragile mosaic of awe and dread. He had heard the words more clearly than any other. What it is to be human, they echoed in his mind not as command but as confession, the Emperor remembered. Outside the palace walls, the city of Terra convulsed in ecstasy and terror. Millions poured into the avenues, their chants rising like waves of firelight. Pilgrims threw themselves upon the marble steps of the Sanctum Imperialis, tearing at their robes, begging forgiveness for sins they could not name. The ecclesiarchy's bells rang without order. Preachers bellowed from the heights of crumbling cathedra, some declaring salvation, others warning of false dawn. Processions collided, blood and oil mingling on the stones. At the same hour, every shrine world in the segmentum solar flared with gold auroras that danced for 3 days and nights. Saints' relics wept. Relic servitors sang hymns in forgotten dialects. The faith of mankind, so long sustained by distance and silence, now trembled beneath the unbearable weight of nearness. On the hive world of Scintilla, Cardinal Lothric stood before the assembled synod, his jeweled crozier shaking in his hand. "He has spoken," he cried, eyes bright with tears. "The throne has awoken. The Emperor remembers us." Across the table, Archconfessor Madrin slammed his fist down. "Blasphemy," he thundered. "No mortal may claim to interpret his will. The voice you heard is not him, it is the warp. The ruinous powers wear gold when it suits them." The chamber erupted in shouts and prayers. Some fell to their knees, others drew last pistols. Faith fractured faster than doctrine could bind it. By the hour's end, Scintilla burned, holy fire consuming heresy or heresy consuming faith. None could tell which. On Mars, the schism deepened into civil litany. The Fabricator General broadcast an edict across the red planet, his vox voice layered with 10,000 subroutines of authority. "The machine god's avatar has stirred," he intoned. The Omnissiah reasserts his logic. All data shrines shall align to the new frequency. To deny it is to defy perfection, yet not all bowed. In the forges of Olympus Mons, dissenting magi gathered beneath the red glow of their manufactoria. "The signal corrupts," hissed Archmagos Irlin. "It rewrites machine spirits, bends them toward worship. Worship is inefficiency. The machine god does not sing." As he spoke, the engines around them began to hum in harmony, tuning themselves to the same heartbeat that pulsed from Terra. Irlin froze, his words dying in his throat. The hum became song. The song became prayer, and in that moment Mars divided. Half knelt to the melody. Half tried to silence it. The first shots of the Red Reformation echoed through the steel valleys. A civil war fought in binary and blood. On the borders of the segmentum obscurus, the Astra Militarum received fragmentary astropathic reports, psychic waves, mass hysteria, voices claiming divine communion. Imperial commanders convened in shadowed holds, debating whether to fortify or to kneel. Commissar Varon of the 92nd Cadian Replacement Brigade stood before his troops, his voice carrying across the frozen wastes of Rax Primus. "You've all heard the stories," he said, his breath turning to frost. "The Emperor has spoken. I don't know if it's true. I only know this: the enemy will hear the same rumor, and they'll falter before we do." He turned, pointing toward the distant horizon where chaos warbands massed in the storm. "If he truly watches, then let him see us fight." The men cheered, the sound thin but defiant. For some, the rumor was terror. For others, it was a weapon sharper than any blade. And far beyond the Imperium's borders, in the endless cold between stars, the enemies of mankind felt it too. In the eye of terror, daemons screamed as the golden pulse rolled through their formless realms. The light burned not as flame, but as memory, a purity they could not endure. Planets of corruption flickered, their surfaces writhing as if recoiling from remembrance. In the tomb worlds of the Necrons, ancient sensors awakened, registering fluctuations they had not recorded since before the war in heaven. The overlords stirred from stasis, their machine minds puzzled. A human signal strong enough to reach the galactic fringe? Impossible, and yet undeniable. The orcs, though they lacked the words, felt the hum in their brutal bones. "Wow!" Energy flared brighter. They called it the flash and gold thing, and to them it meant only one thing: a fight worth running to. Even the Eldari, scattered and dying, paused in their endless flight. Farseers gathered upon the craft worlds, gazing into the skeins of fate. What they saw made even the oldest among them tremble. "The star of humanity burns again," whispered one. "But a star that burns too bright consumes its own light." Back on Terra, Inquisitor Malkion moved like a ghost through the chaos. The streets outside the palace were rivers of devotion, pilgrims thronging in numbers beyond control. He passed them unseen, his black armor absorbing the light. His orders from the Ordo Hereticus were clear: contain the faith before it devoured the Imperium from within. He entered a sealed chamber beneath the Scolum Obscurus, where a circle of inquisitors waited in silence. The air stank of incense and fear. "The signal has unified every psychic choir," Malkion began. "Every astropathic relay now resonates with the same frequency. There is no longer a boundary between transmission and prayer." One of the inquisitors, a gaunt woman in crimson robes, spoke softly. "And the origin?" Malkion paused. "The throne itself." "The Emperor." A murmur swept through the chamber. Half bowed their heads in reverence. The rest drew weapons. "You would have us believe it is him," hissed another. "You would have us dismantle the mechanisms of control, abandon the distance that preserves faith from madness." Malkion met his gaze. "Faith has never preserved anything. Only fear has." The silence that followed was heavier than any decree. Above them, within the throne room, the Emperor's glow had subsided into a soft radiance that pulsed once every few minutes, like the slow heartbeat of a dying star. Yet each pulse sent ripples of energy across the palace, distorting time and thought. Magos Varian watched the readings in awe. "He is neither fully waking nor sleeping," he whispered.
The waveform oscillates between states as if he moves within the dream and without it simultaneously. Guilliman stood beside him, eyes fixed on the golden figure.
"And what happens," he asked, "when the dreamer decides the dream is real?" No one answered, because across the galaxy the dream had already begun to believe in itself. In a lowly hab block on Terra's outskirts, a child named Aelia stirred from sleep. She was 8 years old, malnourished, her fingers scarred from factory work. Yet when she woke that morning, her eyes glowed faintly with gold. She turned to her mother, voice trembling. "Mother," she said, "he remembers us." And though the woman wept and held her child close, she could not shake the feeling that the words were not hers, that they belonged to something vast, ancient and heartbreakingly human, beyond the Imperium channel message. And so, as the light of the Astronomican settles once more into its weary glow, the Imperium stands trembling at the edge of revelation. Across the endless void, men and women whisper of the moment when the Emperor remembered what it was to be human, a heartbeat that shook eternity. Was it awakening or a dream too vast to die? None can know. The throne burns as it always has, and the master of mankind remains both prisoner and god, silent upon his seat of gold. Yet somewhere within that silence, something endures, a single rhythmic pulse echoing through the soul of humanity. The priests call it miracle, the Inquisition calls it contagion, the faithful call it hope. But those who truly heard it know. It was not command nor prophecy, but memory, the sound of a god recalling his own creation. Thank you for venturing beyond the Imperium. If this story stirred the darkness within your imagination, share it with the faithful and the curious alike. Subscribe, keep your eyes upon the stars, and remember, even in the cold, eternal night of the far future, a single human heartbeat can defy the void. Until next time, stand beneath the Emperor's light and never forget what it means to be human.